Russia sends 100 elite goat to North Korea.
Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence.
Russia has sent a batch of pedigree dairy goats to North Korea in the latest gesture of goodwill between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, sending the goats to versus the fish. Goats being used for diplomacy. Goats being used for trade. Goats on the international scene. But what could it mean? But what could it mean? The political verses of Russia and North Korea can be notoriously opaque, as if surrounded by an iron fence. But now we know that goats are part of the verses. Some kind of trade? Maybe. Russia received 100 breeding fish in return? If you did not receive 100 goat for 100 fish, then would it even be a fair versus? We suppose it depends on international fish markets and the price of stonks. Russia got something in return for these 100 breedable goats, and you can be sure that it is some kind of hard power, some kind of soft power, some kind of goat power, some kind of fish power. Let's read on. Elite breedable goats, not just your average breedable goat and not just your average elite goat, but an elite breedable goat. These are effing goats, goat and fish. Effing goats. Seriously, horny goats. 100 of these dairy goats arrived from St. Petersburg on the other side of the country and were then bound for North Korea, having passed veterinary and customs controls, the FCS said. This reminds Goat vs. Fish in the verses of North Korea versus South Korea, which is the goat and which is the fish. This must be an arms shipment from Russia to North Korea to versus South Korea. That would make South Korea the fish. After all, it is surrounded by more of the Sea of the Fish, and now the goat army arsenal has been increased by 100 elite breedable goats. Since the opening of a new route between the countries at Kasan in November 2022, 2,200 live animals have been cleared for shipment to North Korea, including horses, seahorses, fish, and Holstein cows. Are cows goat or are they fish? If they make milk like a goat, they're probably goat. But this is where international relations can get a bit fancy because we don't know how they pronounce goat or fish in every language. Goat versus Fish is still learning how to communication Goat versus Fish to all of you. So can any Russian or North Korean fans of Goat versus Fish please inform Goat versus Fish if a Russian Holstein cow is a goat or if it is indeed a fish? We've heard of a cowfish. And there's the goats. Look at those goats. Look at those goats. Look into the eye of these goats. These are elite breedable goats. And if you don't take care of these goats now, there's going to be more goats and more goats and more goats. Multiplication. In early August, Russia's Veterinary and Agricultural Watch, goat or fish, Roslkhoznadzor announced that it had cleared 447 goats for shipment to Rason, North Korea, which it noted as the first batch of live animals exported to the country. Celebration for the first batch being goat. This sets a goat precedent. This sets a beautiful precedent for goat. Goat came in first that versus. That makes it a triumph for goat. Politico reported that these goat, 432 of them pregnant, according to the press release, were likely exported to help relieve North Korea's food shortages. Pregnant goat, now it's goat trafficking. Now you're trafficking unborn baby goat. This is an international outrage. Goat versus Fish decries this. Trafficking in pregnant and unborn baby goats. Repugnant to Goat versus Fish, repulsive to Goat versus Fish. But as a matter of historical verses, it can be said that the first live animal transfer was goat to North Korea from Russia. So it is still a triumph for goat. It is still a triumph for goat. In November, former ambassador to Russia and member of South Korea's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, Wee Sung-lak, told the Korea Herald that alleviating Pyongyang's food crisis was part of compensation for the transfer of North Korean troops to the Russian armed forces, where they are now reportedly involved in combat operations against Ukrainian soldiers. So it comes back to the false verses of Russia versus Ukraine. And we have Russia trading pregnant goat for willing North Korean soldiers. Goats for soldiers. Goats for soldiers. Goat for soldiers. Does that seem like an even verses to you? Hey, how about you give us some fish to go die on the front lines and we'll send you some pregnant goat? Would you accept this verses? How many humans is a goat worth? How many humans is a pregnant, elite, breedable goat worth? GoatVsFish does not know. We do not even know if a human is a goat or a fish. But these are philosophications for you in international relations. GoatVsFish, GoatVsFish, GoatVsFish. In late August, Primorsky Krais Veterinary Customs Agency said that 24 Orlov trotters, a breed of Russian draft horse, noted for its athleticism, were being shipped to North Korea. These horses, the agency said, had been microchipped to confirm the purity of their lineage. Oh, my verses. We have heard that Elon Muskrat wants to put chips in brains, but we did not know that we wanted to put chips in the brains of horses to verification their purity. Well, there's no purity. There is no purity in the horse unless it is a seahorse, and it will only be pure if it chooses goat or fish, because GoatVsFish is the only pure verses there is, the only pure verses there is. And we did not see one mention of fish in this exchange, so it seems like goat is gaining dominance on the international stage. Last month, 70 animals were transferred to the Central Zoo in Pyongyang, including African lion, 2 bears, 2 yaks, 25 pheasants, 40 mandarin ducks, and 5 cockatoos. You see, this is why the average goat and fish is not trusting the news these verses, giving you clearly made-up false information as if there is such a thing as an African lion, bears, 2 yaks, 25 pheasants, 40 mandarin ducks, 5 cockatoos, GoatVsFish, 4 goat and fish, 3 goat fish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. Are you goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Wow, Mom says, a proxy versus. Yes, indeed. Eldergrown says, an elite versus. Every true versus of GoatVsFish is an elite versus of GoatVsFish, but that does not stop the goat and the fish from counting amongst themselves elite goat and elite fish. New Vegas 10,000 says, can we be elite goats? You can be elite goats, and you can be elite fish, especially if you join the GoatVsFish Patreon for $5 American dollars a month. You too can be an elite goat or fish. Elite goat will defeat the fish if they are not specialists. The fish have specialists of their own. There are elite fish. Oh, don't you despair. Those 100 elite breedable goats, they are very likely to find at least 100 elite breedable fish, and we hear that fish can breed at a much more rapid versus than even goats, than even the horniest of goats. Rami says 100 is not enough. No, we could always use more goat and more fish. Eldergrown says foreign verses can be confusing. Well, until you realize that they're all goat versus fish. Cows more similar to goats? We do not deny that there does appear to be some similarity between cows and goats, the horns, the furs, the milks, but we do like to leave it up to the cows themselves to choose goat or fish. But if GoatVsFish were a betting versus, we would suspect that the cows would go for goat. But then again, we have heard of a cow fish. Have you heard of a cow goat? Are the humans goat or fish? That is the question. Are humans goat or are they fish? That was fun, lol. Celebration, we are glad that you had fun with that versus. We have more news. We have more news of Goat vs. Fish to cover. As Goat vs. Fish Thursday Evolution, we're going to keep covering more and more information on Goat vs. Fish. Wow Mom says both cows and goats have ruminating stomachs. Celebration for rumination. And you can ruminate on Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Why is Goat vs. Fish? What is the meaning of Goat vs. Fish? How did you come up with Goat vs. Fish? Am I Goat vs. Fish? Am I a goat or a fish? Rumination, contemplation, celebration. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Are you goat or a fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Don't go sitting on the fence. Don't go sitting on the fence. Russia, are you goat or fish? North Korea, are you goat or are you fish? This has been a versus of Goat versus Fish. Doobie-doo.